Papa est venu nous chercher pour dire « faut aller à la cave parce que les avions, il y a quelque chose dans le ciel. » Mais c'était un immense brasier. Et on n'est plus sûr, il faut qu'on aille à la cave. Et puis, ma foi, ça faisait du bruit, puis les flammes, et puis le bruit des avions qui se battaient, mon Dieu, mon Dieu. Puis, ça a duré un moment. Et puis alors, ma foi, on était à la cave. Et puis, le lendemain matin, on a appris qu'il y avait un avion tombé.
On the night of July 28th, 29th, 1944, while the Allied armies were fighting to break out of the Normandy beachhead, a Lancaster bomber with a crew of 7 was shot down over the tiny French village of Quittant. The bodies of 3 crew members were found at the crash site. 2 men bailed out and survived the war. 2 men vanished, and their bodies were never found. They were James Harrington Doe of Victoria, BC, and the pilot of the aircraft, Harold Sherman Peabody, a Bishop's University student. What happened to Sherman Peabody was a mystery that continued to haunt his family long after the war.
In our youth, 6 or 7 years old, we used to visit Uncle Harold and Aunt Helen, Sherman Peabody's parents, on Ray Avenue in Sherbrooke. And every time we would visit, there would be a portrait of Sherman on the mantelpiece in the living room. A very handsome, pilot, and he was always, there and very prominent every time we visited. But his parents never really spoke about him in great detail, only to say that he had been in the Second World War, that he had been flying over Europe, his plane was shot down, and then no one knew what had happened to him.
There was this story about Sherman, having been an airman and so on, but there was not a lot of talk about it because nobody really discussed that topic very much. It was just a kind of, yes, he disappeared, but nobody wanted to say anything. Other than the fact the nice way of putting it was they assumed that he was suffering from amnesia and he was wandering around Europe somewhere. That I heard a few times, that they really didn't want to say that he was dead, that he was just missing in action. And that's kind of where the story ended, but you never really pushed the story or asked for more details from his family, never.
3/4 of a century later, students at Bishop's University were commissioned to track down his fate. In 2016-17, students Spiro Trent and Megan Whitworth took on the public history aspect of the project, while Sean Summerfield was the archival researcher. With the support and funding of the Peck brothers, they followed the trail of Sherman Peabody from the old library in McGreer Hall to the Vosges Mountains of France. Their story connects a Bishop's University student to Bomber Command, the French Resistance, the SAS, the Gestapo's war crimes, and to a small French village where the wartime crash of a plane still reverberates today. This is what they uncovered about Harold Sherman Peabody. Sherman Peabody's family had roots in the eastern townships going back to the Loyalists. They had land in Mansonville and a house on Portland Avenue in Sherbrooke. Sherman enrolled in the new sciences degree at Bishop's in 1938. He was a championship golfer, a cross-country runner, and an active hockey player. Within a year, however, life on campus was overshadowed by war, and soon the depth of danger facing the democracies became clear as country after country fell to Hitler's armies.
Throughout his time at Bishop's, the culture which had developed at the university was one which was gripped by war. When one looks at the Mitre and other university publications at the time, the main thing which is dominating all persons' lives is the Second World War. Just before the war, all writing is essentially analyzing what it is the Germans will do, what them, as the young generation which will have to fight this war, will have to do, remembering the great costs of the First World War. These young men would have been very scared, and it would have been a very hard time to be a university student. By 1941 and 42, most of the men in the classes had withdrawn from their programs, and in 43 as well, and had joined the service. Graduation rates throughout this period kind of dwindled to very, very small numbers.
By the end of 1941, Sherman had left Bishop's University without completing his degree in order to join the forces, with a recommendation from Principal McGreer that this honorable and alert young man would be a desirable recruit for the RCAF. In the spring of 1944, Sherman Peabody was a trained bomber pilot assigned to 622 Squadron, based at Mildenhall, England, carrying out missions over occupied Europe and Nazi Germany. At 10 p.m. on July 28, 1944, nearly 500 aircraft of Bomber Command took off from their bases in Britain to attack the railway yards at Stuttgart, Germany, an important industrial and transportation target. Among the planes that night was K for King, the oldest Lancaster bomber in 622 Squadron. It carried a bomb load of 5,000 and two 500-pound bombs and was piloted by Sherman Peabody on his 9th mission. The bomber stream crossed the Channel and swung south of Paris. It then headed due east towards the Vosges Mountains, beyond which lay the Rhine, and that night's target, the rail yards at Stuttgart. As they flew, they began to attract the attention of German night fighters. Among the Luftwaffe planes that night was a Junkers 88 night fighter piloted by Lieutenant Walter Svoboda. As the bombers streamed neared the border of Germany, and with the moon illuminating the plains at 15,000 feet, Svoboda's senior officer picked up the trail of K for King and made a first pass. The Lancaster's gunners spotted the night fighter and shouted for the pilot to evade. Peabody performed the usual maneuver in such a case, diving and corkscrewing the heavy plane. As a result, the powerful 20mm explosive cannon rounds passed harmlessly over the Lancaster. But German pilots were used to this trick, and they knew that as the plane climbed to rejoin the bomber's stream, it would sacrifice speed for height and would be particularly vulnerable to attack. Lieutenant Svoboda, the junior wingman, was waiting for them as they climbed out of their dive and attacked. This time, the bomber was stricken. The rear gunner, Sergeant Buckley, was killed instantly, and the mid-upper gunner, Sergeant Prou, was mortally wounded. The Lancaster began to lose altitude and was no longer airworthy. Flight engineer George Wishart and bombardier Lou Fiddick managed to bail out. Both survived the war. The radio operator, Peyton, attempted to bail, but jumped too low to survive. Navigator James Harrington Doe and pilot Sherman Peabody simply disappeared. Ever since, there has been little consensus about their fate and several conflicting accounts and theories. Lou Fiddick provided the first accounts of the aftermath of the crash. 2 days after parachuting out, he was taken in by a French farmer, linked up to the resistance, and then passed on to an SAS unit operating behind the lines. In late September 1944, Fiddick was infiltrated through to Allied territory and returned to England. He reported that he'd been second to bail out and that he did not know whether any of the rest of the crew had bailed out or not. But back in Canada, 1 year later, Fiddick told Flying Officer Doe's father that the priest in the nearby village of Cirey-sur-Vezouze had heard that the Germans had captured 2 flyers by the side of the road. Fiddick's new information that Peabody and Doe had been captured by the Germans prompted officials to open a formal inquiry into their fate. In January 1946, the Missing Research and Inquiry Service, based in Paris, sent a small team to the village of Pétimont, where the 3 dead crew were buried, and to Cirey-sur-Vezouze to conduct an investigation. Its conclusion was that Lou Fiddick's story of airmen being captured had no foundation whatsoever, as no one in Cirey could confirm this statement. Crucially, the team stated in its report that as it crashed near Pétimont, the aircraft caught fire and the bomb load exploded, disintegrating the aircraft. The officers became convinced that the most likely fate of Sherman Peabody and his navigator was that they were still in the aircraft when it exploded and were blown to pieces. This became the official position of the RCAF, which formally closed its books on the case in 1951, writing to Peabody's father, "It must be regretfully accepted and officially recorded that your son and Flying Officer Doe perished in the crash and have no known graves." Sean Summerfield and Megan Whitworth had assembled most of this information through extensive archival work at Bishop's, in Ottawa, and online, even discovering the identity of the German pilot who shot the Lancaster down. Their next stop was overseas, in the archives in London and in Paris, and crucially, to the small village in eastern France where Peabody's plane came down. What they found there, and what they learned from the villagers, was to change the direction of their hunt dramatically. Megan had taken over the public history portion of the research from Spiro Trent in January 2017, and she now came into her own in Petit-Mont, where she held a town hall meeting to question the villagers about the events of 1944.
So during the town hall of March 2017, when we were asking questions and basically just trying to collect all the oral histories about the time, we were really surprised because we went in with the idea that, the plane crashed, exploded. Unfortunately, they had died and that was it. But as soon as people started talking, we were kind of veered in the other direction of, well, maybe something else happened.
Several of the villagers alive at the time told her that the plane had not exploded upon impact. It was still largely intact with dead bodies inside. The bombs were still in the bomb rack, and one villager described how he suddenly realized he was standing on a bomb when he went to the crash site. It was the Germans who, several days later, blew up the plane rather than risk moving the bomb load. Crucially, the cockpit was intact and empty, leading to the conclusion that the plane had been brought down under some control and had managed to land without major damage in a hilly and wooded area. The landowners revealed another critical piece of evidence to Megan.
Mon oncle Jean Michaud a trouvé, pas très loin du lieu du crash, sur une roche qu'on appelle la roche de Roland, parce c'est une roche qui est fendue, comme si Roland, avec son épée, l'avait fendue, des rations de survie qui étaient ouvertes. Et donc, lui, à ce moment-là, il s'est dit, il y a vraisemblablement des aviateurs survivants qui ont pris des rations pour pouvoir avoir de la nourriture pendant qu'ils essayaient de s'évader, enfin d'échapper des lieux.
He buried them very quickly so that the Germans wouldn't find it and that nobody would know that there would be survivors. Came home, told his wife, told his sons, and that was it. No one ever spoke of it again. And he just kind of dropped it on us and then moved on to another topic. So I was just kind of taken aback for a second. He took us to the Rock a few months later. But it really is at a crossroad where it really can't be anybody else. It had to be survivors because the other two were injured and they went in different directions. So that really was a vital piece of information.
It now appeared almost certain that Sherman Peabody and James Doe had survived the crash, yet they neither escaped nor appeared as prisoners of war. So, where were they? As our students headed back to the archives, another, more chilling possibility began to emerge. In fact, parallel to the Missing Research Unit's inquiry was another far more extensive investigation by a newly formed War Crimes Investigation Team. This inquiry pointed towards 2 SS concentration camps in Alsace, Schirmeck, which was a transit and collection center, and the far more sinister Natzweiler Struthof, located at a remote mountaintop site.
De l'autre côté de la crête des Vosges, on passe le Donon et il y a une ville, Schirmeck, qui avait un camp. Ce camp est plutôt un camp de prisonniers, mais c'est l'antichambre du camp de concentration, qu'on appelle Struthof, Natzweiler Struthof, qui est dans un endroit qu'on est obligé de dire magnifique. Et c'était un site touristique avant. Et ils ont mis un camp de concentration là, au sommet, avec un paysage splendide, mais c'était l'enfer, évidemment. Donc, dans ce camp de concentration, il y avait des fours crématoires pour brûler les corps. Le camp était un camp de travail, les gens mouraient en général de travail et de non-alimentation. Il pouvait y avoir quelques exécutions, des pendaisons, des choses comme ça. C'était pas le but premier, en principe. Mais il semble que dans cette période, c'est-à-dire à partir de fin juillet 1944, il y a eu des nuits entières où on abattait les gens qui n'étaient pas dans le camp, mais qu'on amenait au camp pour ça. C'est-à-dire qu'on ne les enregistrait pas. Quelqu'un qui, entre guillemets, doit travailler chez vous, vous l'enregistrez. Quelqu'un qui vient juste pour se faire abattre et incinérer, c'est ce qui semble s'être passé, il n'y a pas de nom.
Among those who were said to have been brought to Schirmeck in this period were a small number of bailed-out airmen, including 2 prisoners, one of whom resembled Peabody, according to a guard at the camp. Very soon after making this connection, however, the investigations unit was demobilized and no further action was taken. In exploring the files of Nazi war criminals investigated after the war, our Bishop's researchers made additional discoveries. They found documents which make it almost certain that both Sherman Peabody and James Doe were sent first to Schirmeck and then, on the orders of Commandant Hartenstein, sent to Natzweiler-Struthof in a truck after dark in order to avoid notice. There, following orders of Joseph Goebbels that all aircrew falling into the hands of the SS or Gestapo were to be executed, they were murdered and their bodies incinerated in the camp's crematorium. 3 aircrew were said to have been murdered at Natzweiler-Struthof. 1 victim's name is known, the other 2 are not. No other airmen at the time are unaccounted for. Now, in 2018, there is every reason to believe these 2 men were James Doe and Sherman Peabody. Their deaths were a crime against the laws of war and took place at a site where 22,000 men and women, many of whom were active resistors, met their end. Three-quarters of a century after the death of Sherman Peabody, fellow Bishop's University students provided his family with closure and connected them to the villagers of eastern France who helped one of his crew escape and have tended the graves of 3 others ever since. Within the small and close history department, which typifies the university, undergraduate students were able to take on a difficult and complex research project and to carry it out with both determination and compassion. The hunt for Sherman Peabody illustrates in vivid detail that history at Bishop's is a living thing, connecting its students across the generations.